Welcome to Expedition Self on OMTimes Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parrotto. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parrotto.
Well, hello, I'm Sam Parrotto, and you have arrived at Expedition Self. Before I get started today, I want to let everyone know this is a call-in show. And it's the number is 202-570-7057. You want to write that down today because this is going to be one of those shows where you may want to really share some of the things that are on your mind. Today's topic is how do people become mean? And it's no accident that I chose this topic given the war that's being waged on the Ukraine right now by someone who, appears to very much be operating out of mean. Right? But it actually, believe it or not, got triggered when I was trying to maneuver around a very confined parking lot over the weekend. And I was, wasn't a big parking lot, lots of cars coming and going. And I needed this young woman to pull up so that I could get out and make room for the 3 cars that were behind me trying to also get out. I couldn't reverse. And she would not move. So we kept hand signaling to the other one, right? It was just kind of funny, I'm showing her how I want her to pass me so I can get out. And she keeps emphatically, with a lot of torque in her pointing finger, keeps indicating the very obvious open parking space that awaited her on my right. Well, I couldn't back up and let her in, or I would have. Right? I could only go forward. And this went on for 4 or 5 minutes. I think there were 4 or 5 pointing exchanges waiting for the other one to make a move. If you could have seen the scowl on her face, she was mad. She looked very judgmental and frustrated. And truly, I couldn't, at the moment, I could not see anything else to do other than to get out of my car and walk over and talk to her. So the thing is she had to relinquish her fear that she wouldn't get this parking space and make room for the 5 other drivers in that parking lot. She had to decide that she would back up once I got out and then get her parking space. Well, she finally did actually pull up far enough for me to get out. It was tight. And I'm pretty sure that I was the topic of conversation that afternoon. I was faced with my own irritation and my own real shock and surprise at her unwillingness to me, which was to be reasonable, to see what was going on. She looked mean to me, and I'm pretty sure I looked mean to her. These kinds of things happen to me all the time. They're everyday moments when someone doesn't want to deal with what's happening from a place of harmony and workability and collaboration. And I watch them play out around me, people doing it all the time. So I'm curious, do you notice them too? Is this something that you're aware of also? And does it draw your attention? A lot of times it doesn't just stop at not wanting to be cooperative though. It moves into this mean territory, which is pretty much, to me, when there's no care for the other person, there's no desire to understand the other person's circumstances, and there's a lack of goodwill and a capacity to own their side, right, of what's happening, or to, in this case, to own my side of what's happening. And this mean mode is generally willing to operate inside a conflict with really a lot of no regard for how it feels or it plays out. It's as if conflict is normal and it's expected and it's acceptable. I have story after story They happen in the grocery store. They happen on the highway. They happen on the telephone pole, over a telephone pole that's, not doing what it's supposed to do and people get around it. They happen with family members and coworkers too. But at this moment, we're definitely watching mean on a global scale. And I just had to make sure we talked about it. I don't normally do shows that are kind of assessments of what's happening with other people, but I don't know, this is one moment that feels really important. We've been watching mean play out in the government for a while now. Heck, last night, 2 elected officials sat in the State of the Union address when President Biden spoke about the death of his son, and they mocked him and heckled him. I thought that was mean. And we see mean played out on social media as well. So, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. Where people give themselves permission to call each other names in service to their viewpoints. They use social media as a sort of power well that they can direct and harness, to get their opinions out, and they just call it opinions, right? They just call it viewpoints, and pain and suffering is not what matters at all. It's more about who listens. And it gets more robust when someone feels justified, like they're the wounded party, like this is their offset, right? This is what makes it all fair. So I just couldn't avoid it anymore. I couldn't not talk about mean. And while I'm talking about it, I hope you'll find your own mean moments. Because when we talk about growth work, the point is always, always to see ourselves more clearly, to recognize that what happens in the world is being mirrored back to us all the time so that we can have a better understanding and insight about who we are as human beings. So I can't imagine you don't have some mean moments. I know I do. And I certainly have the ones, because we register those quite well, the ones where we felt like someone was mean with us. I've done a few shows lately about feeling self-important, or what does it mean to have a compassionate heart. I even did a show a while back about victimization, which I wholeheartedly encourage everyone to listen to, because it certainly plays a role in mean. But one of the key areas I want to focus on today is how mean gets created. Where does it start? How does it get fueled and validated? How is it reinforced? So let me begin by saying that it has everything to do with emotion, or the lack of emotional processing, or validating emotional material. Everything. Now, many of you may already think of emotion as water, because this is how I like to think about it. So water, it can freeze, it can become very sharp like an icicle, it can fall in delicate snowflakes, it can become stagnant and riddled with bacteria, it can form a giant tsunami. So the problem is that it's like a human body part to have emotions, no different than your lungs or your hand or your kneecap. But the problem with emotions is that most people just don't have a healthy and empowered relationship with them. They for the most part, try to keep them, from having any power over their own rationality or their own ability to be in control. Like, emotions are seen as a weakness or the enemy, right? Because it makes our nerve endings come alive. And then the brain, it registers pain. I find myself hearing, the rain in Spain stays mainly. Okay, let me go back to this. So the nerve endings come alive, and then the brain registers pain and discomfort and agitation. And of course, some of the bigger emotions like disappointment or fear, they activate a number of physical nerve centers at once. So it's like the stomach, the muscles, the eye sockets, the heart rate, the breathing, the fingertips. They can all go into overdrive, right? Because they're layering one on top of each other. And or if you think about it, they're like dominoes. One's triggering the next thing, that's triggering the next thing. It's a lot to be able to be within the body. And for this reason, the more we don't have a healthy relationship or a developed relationship with our emotions, the more we'll be mean. Now, right now, you may be thinking, what's she talking about? I only see mean as this, not that. So we might be in a conversation at this very moment where my definition of mean is wider and broader than yours is. And that's okay. That's actually part of thinking about this idea of what is mean. And so to me, mean is when we are completely unfeeling and uncaring about what our thoughts and feelings and actions are causing with someone else. So it's this emotion, this undeveloped relationship with our emotions. We're freezing what's supposed to be a free flow through our bodies when we don't have this developed relationship. Or we're actually holding back the water completely. And this brings us like to a very brittle, rigid, breakable place. And the more breakable we feel, right, the more we don't want to melt into ourselves and feel like a puddle, well, the more we have to defend. In Chinese astrology, they talk about being very woody, or you could think of it as earthy. But the more water doesn't soften the wood or the earth, the more brittle and splintery and fracturable, that's a big word, it actually becomes. Think about it. I know this sounds kind of abstract, but if you allow the water that runs through your psyche to harden or become scarce, then you're basically causing a kind of hardness and tension and intransigence and strictness to be the resulting state of being. And I use that word strictness because I think a lot of parents don't even realize that they don't have a relationship there with their emotional experience, and it translates to them being strict parents, and they feel justified in it. Mean is a result of every place where you don't cultivate a softening and an understanding and discernment of emotion. It's a byproduct of getting so far away from the source of that water flow or that emotional experience that's big that you don't realize that the water is what's at the root to begin with. I feel like I should try to say that again, just so you really get it. That mean is a result of all the places where you don't work to find softening and understanding and the discernment of emotion. And what happens is, because of that, we get further and further away from the source of what caused that intransigence to begin with, that rigidity to begin with, because you don't realize what's at the root anymore. So that woman who was so at it with me in the car, and the places where I couldn't find another option with her but to sit and do sign language and let her get more frustrated, those were the places where emotions, somewhere in her life and in mine, that they didn't get worked through. If you do one thing in your life, if you work on one area of your entire lifetime that will pay off in the biggest way possible, work to invite emotion into your body, learn to work with it by processing it, and recognize it as an essential and a necessary aspect of living. The idea that you become so skilled at teasing apart in your actual body and experience every single kind of emotion. There are hundreds of them inside of who you are. Even if you were able to distinguish 10 of them so fully and completely that you recognize when they're at play, because a lot of times with emotion, again, it looks like thought, not like feeling. Now, I want to take another moment and talk about what emotional processing is. It's a slowing down and giving yourself a chance to actually feel what you're feeling, to let it fill your body up, to give words to the thoughts that come with the feelings, and to understand how that emotional moment connects to your sense of self, of being loved and appreciated and valued and safe and worthy. This is what emotional processing is all about, and it takes time and it takes intention. And you have to decide you're going to do it, or it doesn't just happen naturally. You know, we live in a world now where you can watch videos about emotion. They even make movies now, like Inside Out, about it. You can buy journals that focus on it. It's no longer a no-no to work with. So when you think about me, think about how developing a superior and extraordinary emotional ability to process all those skills, think about how that is your contribution to making your world and the world we live in a little more livable. All right, so when we come back, we're going to go on with this conversation.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at OMTimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
All right, we're back. I'm Sam Parrotto, and you're listening to Expedition Self. And we're talking about how we become mean. And so before we went on break, I was really focusing on one of the most important places to recognize that produce meanness is undeveloped relationship with emotions. So here's the thing. Having emotions means that you're going to feel this emotion when things happen in your life, like my driving moment. So that's the place where if you don't get a really good handle on ownership, you're going to just feel completely justified now about feeling what you feel. Because the way you're going to relate to that is though something was done to you. Something happened to you, you were completely powerless, and that experience without the ownership starts to give it a lot more play. And your brain starts collecting more and more data to make it true. This is the big thing that causes mean to be what it is. No ownership. And And ownership is multifaceted. I could do 10 shows and probably never really do it justice. It's the kind of thing that when you're working on yourself, ownership comes in at different times. So you can have ownership about one piece of what you're dealing with in your life, right? Something that happened, but then you cannot have ownership around the next piece. But ownership around emotion has to do with getting that your emotions are yours. They live in your body, they come from your life, and they are yours to be responsible for. They are not a result of someone else's actions. Now, I know this seems illogical, right? Like, well, if that person hadn't done it, then I wouldn't feel this. But I'm saying those feelings are already there. They're dormant, latent, awaiting a trigger, right? The way to think about it is that someone else does something and it triggers the emotions that are in your refrigerator. They're always in the refrigerator and some are in the freezer, right? They didn't reach over and squeeze the emotion, right, out of you that they placed with you like ketchup or mustard. It was yours to feel the entire time. So this idea that you get triggered, which makes it seem like someone's causing it, they're actually your triggers. They live from you. I'd be interested if anybody would call in and just talk a little bit about how you can think about this idea of triggering an emotion and how that plays into this mean. Because really, if you think about it, when you're triggered, you're not thinking about the other person. You're only thinking about what's going on in you. So I'm going to give you the number one more time before I go on. It's 202-570-7057. So when I feel uncared about, it's a result of my lifetime of moments when I didn't feel cared about and I felt something about that. So for every moment of your life, you felt some emotion. I mean this, every moment you felt something. And for every emotion you felt, you actually felt something about that. So when I felt like my friends were insensitive to me, I felt hurt. But then when I felt hurt, I felt devastated and betrayed about my friendships. And then on top of that, I felt displaced in them. You see, one thing leads to the next thing. And if we don't unpack that, then those are the things that get stuck in the freezer and they are put away. They're waiting in the background looking for these triggers. And this is what ownership does for you. It has you possess everything that you are aware of, and capital A-N-D here, and everything that you aren't yet aware of. But if you can't stand in ownership of it all, then what's happening is you're reinforcing over and over that you're powerless. You're reinforcing that you are not the one who is causing your life, right? And on that receiving end of that, where you don't own that your emotions are yours, that is literally the primordial ooze of me. It really is the core ingredients that make up, that particular recipe. No ownership, it pretty much means you're going to be reactive. No ownership pretty much means you can justify any mean action you'll ever take. And it's possible that you won't feel anything about those mean actions because you don't have a relationship to the feeling anymore. Now imagine that we as human beings are wired such that we can actually become so disconnected that we lose track that we had a feeling about something, that our brains twist it and turn it and build on it and package it. And then we justify our actions that even though we're being mean, it's okay. So every single time an emotion is triggered in me, knowing that I'm not as emotionally developed as much as I could be, which means I don't have ownership of all my emotions. I am a reaction waiting to happen. And if I don't grab a hold of that and make that mine, if I don't turn that in a different direction, mean is likely to be a part of what gets expressed and pushed out into the world. And the first piece of that is whether or not I'll be brave enough to admit that I was mean. So I want to stop and talk about this, given that we're looking at someone right now in the world who looks cold and mean, Putin. And when you read about his justifications for his actions, they're based on a whole lot of emotion. Something was taken from him. He's not happy about it. Actually, he's more than not happy. He's on a very clear vengeance mission. And it often appears when I look at his pictures, this is just my perception, please don't feel like you have to agree with it at all, but it appears like his emotion is just smoldering on the surface. Like it's so hot that it's blue heat, and it's so cold that it's been in the freezer for a long time. You know, what is required of someone to be in the Secret Service, to rise to what he did in leadership, to be someone who must always be in control of these emotions. And let me remind you, to be in control of emotions is to block them off. But they're still in the background because they're as much a part of being human as the hand or as your big toe. And so the complete disconnect from emotion to thought, it happens. And when this happens, ideology and beliefs get made very real and very true, even though they're fueled by emotion that's either unknown or frozen over or compartmentalized or buried. So then the thought becomes concrete, locked in stone, and immovable. Gosh, that's a lot. I'm saying a lot, right? I'm trying to say that this area of our life is that important. And it's so important not only to open the relationship up, but then to actually own that it's all yours, which is in some ways so counterintuitive to the mind, right? Because when you poke yourself with a pin, you want to say, ouch. And it looked like the pin caused what happened. But in the emotional world, that's not how it works. So this lack of emotional process is a big contributor to mean. But beneath this is deprivation. So we've got emotional processing, right? Connection to emotion. We've got ownership. And now we're talking about deprivation. Not having enough to eat. Not being able to sleep safely. Not being in a situation where you can be comfortable and know that you're able to survive. This deprivation, it lives beneath so much of what becomes justifiable meanness. And of course, there's small aspects of deprivation that we can all look to, which I hope you're able to do in this conversation. We're talking about really big, intense, wide-reaching kinds of human experiences. And then we're also, hopefully, you're applying your experiences, the ones that might not look so extreme. Like being left out of a club or not being able to afford what your best friend did when you were in high school. And then, of course, there's the kind of deprivation that Putin was exposed to. Being sent away to grow up with a surrogate family. Living with rats in a city that was under nearly 3 years of siege during World War II in Leningrad. His mother was so malnutritioned once that she fainted, and because they thought she was dead, she was laid out on the sidewalk with other people who had passed, and if she hadn't roused and coughed, they would have actually assumed she was gone. And along with this level of deprivation came a kind of neglect, right? Because when we don't have enough, right, we end up oftentimes with parents that just can't pay attention or give affection because they're so desperate themselves to survive. Now, I'm talking about deprivation on a very, very physical survival level that's really, really traumatizing. But I'm also talking about the kind of deprivation when we feel like we don't get enough acknowledgement in our lives, or we don't have enough, feel like we're accepted enough, or we don't feel like we're worthy enough, or we're criticized all the time. There's a deprivation, maybe even a sense of neglect when people don't pay attention to us or care about our needs. I want to share a direct quote from something that Putin wrote in first person. It's called In First Person, an astonishingly frank self-portrait. He published it in 2000, and here's what he writes. There were hordes of rats in the front entryway. My friends and I used to chase them around with sticks. Once, I spotted a huge rat and pursued it down the hall until I drove it into a corner. It had nowhere to run. And suddenly it lashed around and threw itself at me. I was surprised and frightened. Now the rat was chasing me. Luckily, I was a little faster, and I managed to slam the door shut on its nose. There, on that stair landing, I got a quick and lasting lesson in the meaning of the word cornered. Now think about that. That is a first-hand account of a traumatic experience processed at that time and afterwards from Vladimir Putin, who is currently in a space in our lives. He's occupying a space in our lives of very mean. I have heard so many stories in my work over the long time of people who began life with this kind of lack, this kind of deficiency and scarcity. And for each person, think about it, the kind of emotion that would rise from that. If there's no way to process, no way to work through it, then there's likely a kind of deep backlash that one goes after. A sort of a vow to never be poor again, or to never be powerless again, or as I once said, to never lose again, to never feel looked down upon again. The deprivation of physical needs, the deprivation of emotional needs, the deprivation, that's a very big word, of intellectual safety or stimulation. Every bit of it produces a pocket of the void of self, of the place where the self, it wraps itself around what wasn't there. And it creates this void. But what happens in that then is the self isn't one or whole, because there's this whole, not whole, W-H-O-L-E, right? But there's a whole, H-O-L-E, where this emotional experience, this being experience was happening. But there was no processing. And when this happens, it means that somewhere in life, somewhere during the day or the week, mean will likely be a player as they go through life, or as you go through life, or as I go through life. Remember, without having emotion to make contact with, or the water, there's no way to soften the hard earth and wood that emerges from it. because their emotion is soft when it starts. And the only way that someone can hold that stand, that hard stand, is to defend, is to offend, to dominate, to assert, to be aggressive. Because nothing can be allowed in that would weaken the front. And this produces mean. Let me say this again. It produces mean. Every one of us has something like this, some piece of it, some small portion of it. We have something of this. Some of us have more of it, and some of us have even more of it. And someone like Vladimir Putin has a lot of it. I know I don't often sound quite so definitive or like I'm putting such a label or statement, but I just want to put a stake in the ground about this, is that most of us just don't want to see the universal nature of mean. We want to see ourselves as good, right? And so by nature of that, we divest ourselves from looking at what mean can look like, or even if you don't even see mean, recognize that you have aspects of what creates mean. We don't want to recognize that our beliefs and the way we wield our values is an expression of our own relationship to emotions, not to a bunch of ideas. It's a relationship to, right, how rigid we are, how righteous we are is the degree to which we experienced deprivation and dearth. Oh, let me add one more thing before we head to break. And being mistreated and bullied and overpowered and abused and exposed to violence. When we come back, we'll go to the third major element of mean.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. ascendinghearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Okay, we're back. I'm Sam Parrotto, and this is Expedition Self. We are talking about what causes us to be mean. And before we went to break, I talked about this next thing, which is about being mistreated and bullied and exposed to violence. So this is the third major element I want to highlight while we're looking at mean. Almost always when you find the mean corner of someone or yourself, you'll also find a level of mistreatment and fear-inducing behavior that somehow causes the person to feel helpless in the face of it. This is a really, really rough thing. So in the case of Putin, he had all three. No ability to process emotion or know what it was, deprivation in both the physical and emotional realm, And according to what I read, he was a small boy and was bullied often until he taught himself or learned the martial art judo and could begin to fend for himself. So with his parents preoccupied with working all the time, he learned all of his social skills in the schoolyard at the receiving end of other kids and himself jockeying for their own positions. So this abuse of power is an almost acceptable condition of growing up everywhere. Everyone in our society expects to be mistreated by their peers at school at some point. And it's so sad because we're perpetuating the very things we say we don't want. Because we don't know how to stop the use of violence and aggression as a way of working out differences and learning how to socialize. And you know, the interesting thing on the parent debate, this is just a little outtake here, is parents that try to stay connected and try to stay, close to, all right, how do we make sure that all children are being treated well? They're considered helicopter parents. Or it's like, back up and let our kids be kids and let them work it out. They'll work it out. Yeah, well, I have to just tell you, I've met a lot of adults. It didn't get worked out that way. They went into adulthood in some ways, right, perpetuating or dealing with how that actually played out. So with every moment of life, when one of these key factors is at play, it's creating an equal void where we have the potential to be mean in the future. And remember, I look at life as every minute of every hour of every day of every week of every month of every year. I don't look at life as like this, like 5 days roll into one idea. I'm talking every minute. So I'm pretty sure, because I see it all over my life, those little voids, those little packets or, postage stamp size moments, the more those factors layer up and roll in on each other, the more substantial our defenses, the more righteous we get about our ideas, the more self-protected we become, and the more unfeeling we are. When we don't want to deal with mean from a heart level, we employ a wide range of coping strategies that we instead, right, we use instead, like avoidance. We just withhold. We just don't carry it. We just don't tell people what's really going on. And then they have to feel it or deal with the ramifications of some action or some choice we've made. Right? Or covert thwarting of the other person's goals. Yeah, I knew that person was going to screw it up, but I decided I'd just let them do it. I just watch them play it out since they always think that they know what they're doing. Right? Or waiting for the right moment and then unleashing some emotional rant on them. How many of you have been in this moment where you were talking about, I don't know, what you were going to do on Friday night, and then there was a conversation about how Friday night didn't work, and the next thing you knew, you were talking about some Friday night that happened 20 years ago, and now all of a sudden you actually start finding, out how somebody felt about it, and of course then when that actually happens, it comes at you and you feel like it's not kind. It feels mean. Or another one would be carrying hurts and disappointments around, but never really talking through them with anyone. So you're just really a sitting duck waiting for the next hurt. We do all of this. When we don't want to really get underneath all the things that can produce mean, we do all of this. What's your coping strategy? How do you handle the emotional material, the deprivation that might have happened in your world? Have you even looked at it? Right? Do you know what it is? And do you know when you are actually being mean? Are you willing to see it? Do you know that one of the meanest things we do is talk about family members in judgmental ways to other family members? Even like you can do this in coworkers, right? We build consensus against people we say we care about. I'm saying that's mean. Splitting people up, right? Wedging, like getting one person to see something about somebody else and turning them on each other. And we can do that in ways where we don't have to actually be visible about it, right? That's mean. We hold on to resentments about people and we don't tell them. We don't tell them. We don't go in it with the desire to work through the resentment. And then we just keep collecting more data about them. That's mean. We get attached. We get attached to our possessiveness. This one's a personal one of mine. Happens to me a lot, or goes on for me. We get attached to our possessiveness and our security and our needs. And then we get mean when others don't get on board, right? When all of a sudden there's a battle, there's a tug of war. That woman got really attached to making sure that no one else got that parking space. Really attached. And while I sat there, I actually couldn't figure out how to get unattached. So, before we get to the end of this conversation today, there's something I hope to achieve. I hope that you think about wanting to embrace and welcome seeing mean in your own life, from your own life. That you take off the bad stuff about it and start seeing it as an outcome of life happening for you, through you. And I'd like you to start standing up for something different than mean, like catch it like a ball, right? Say, oh, I got it. And then look at it and then think about how do you bring another perspective or another option or way of being to really, truly recognize mean from a place that isn't judgmental or wounded, but instead, or rather, from a place of deep and profound understanding. So this means that there are no bad guys. You don't have the good guy who is justified and the bad guy that deserves anything he or she gets. Now, this is super difficult because right now Putin is a bad guy. He is the bad guy. He is now doing the bullying. He is being mean. And he's had a very high volume or dose of no emotional processing, lots of deprivation, and plenty of dominance and a power abuse through violence and aggression. I can't even imagine that he has any access to his heart and any of the original experience that shaped who he is. And now he's playing that role out for millions of other people, triggering their mean. Now, I'm not someone who's working on that scale. If I was, I'd say that if Putin had done his growth work, he would have been able to bring all that power to bear for a much more collectively humane, productive, constructive reason, but he didn't. And now we've got what we've got, his calcified heart. His mind patterns are so set now. There's very little that can be done to reach him, to influence him, because he is literally locked and loaded and fully believing himself. You know, the mind, it has a way of building itself up when that level of deprivation is experienced, as a way to compensate for the profound lack of self that's actually at the root. And this is when we can't let mean stay in power or in the lead. So it's not my subject to talk about what you do with someone when they're this disconnected. I just want you to understand some of the things that I think are at play. But there are some extraordinary things we can take away from this moment, and I'd like to share them with you. I saw a young Russian soldier being fed a sandwich and tea by the Ukrainians, and they let him call his mother. And she was in disbelief that he was in a war against Ukraine. And he told her, "Mom, it's true." And then he began to cry. This was not a mean moment. This was one that in so many ways, people could have had closed hearts. They could have been mean. I've watched many of them, and of course Zelensky could be so mean in his speaking, but he's really not. But we know that the people inside Russia who are experiencing the sanctions and the disruption to their lives are feeling like the mean is coming at them. And this is something you should know. This is something we should learn. Mean is a reinforcing loop. It always gets passed along unless someone chooses a different path. It is a reinforcing loop. It always goes on. It finds the next place to be worked out. So you can either choose to see the places where you could be acting out all of that lack of emotional processing or physical and emotional deprivation and abuse of power through violence, force, and aggression, and turn inward. Or you can disrupt the other person's experience and help them turn inward. What I know about mean is that we have to start to see ourselves through the lens of all of this. We have to know that we give ourselves permission, every one of us, to be mean. I've had so many moments when I decided that it was my turn and that I had the need to get my needs met. And in that moment, it didn't matter if I was mean. And of course, when our survival is on the line, we feel like we have something that's been taken from us, or we're embarrassed or humiliated, or we've been hurt, it's at this point that for many of us, we will let mean rule the day. Sometimes we even get revenge. We get spiteful. We divide. Right? We're justified in being mean because they deserve it. But this is the thing. When you are mean to another, this is another learning, you are taking a piece of yourself out. There is a cost to yourself. You are robbing yourself of something, even if you don't know it. I said to someone recently, but you're being spiteful. And they said, yeah, but it makes me feel better. And now we come full circle. That feeling that felt so bad when you felt so deprived or helpless, when you are mean or get back at someone for how you perceive you've been treated, it creates this pseudo-equalization thing. And for just a brief moment, it feels like the playing field is finally level. As if something is fair, as if we're vindicated and made whole for one moment because they feel the pain we felt. But it doesn't. That woman who went home after encountering me in the parking lot, she is probably still carrying around her resentment of me. She is weighed down by whatever she can't work out. While she is making it all about what I did to her, she'll never really be free of it. Because she'd have to see her own inner experience that was actually at the source of it. She'd have to find her ownership, or she'll never have power with it. So these are the things we can look at as human beings. Why is fair so important to us? How is it connected to all those moments of emotion that needed processing, deprivation, and power misused? Why is it so hard to own our participation in the events of our life and our feelings about it? And what would cause you to be willing to look at this in your life? Would you be willing to see that everyone has a power that gets put into play at one point or another that amplifies our meanness? And how can you stop reducing every difficult moment of hurt or anger or powerless to having a good guy and a bad guy? I hope that today's conversation really helps you to think about what makes us human and how we really operate in the world in ways that I think we'd like to not see. Thank you for being with me in my show. And I have a couple of quotes, and I think I have another minute I can read one. This one is from, I think it's from a book from James Patterson called The Angel Experiment. And this is what he says in it. It's a quote. "It gets so tiring, this strong picking on the weak stuff. It was the story of my life, literally. And it seemed to be a big part of the outside world, too. I was sick of it. Sick of guys like these, stupid and bullying." All right, and this is another one from Laura Moriarty. I think I still am okay time-wise. My mother says that when Mrs. Rowley is mean, which is generally the case, it's really because she's just unhappy. And who could blame her with a husband like that? She says, this is really the only reason people are ever mean. They have something hurting inside of them, a claw of unhappiness scratching at their hearts. And it hurts them so much that sometimes they have to push it right out of their mouths to scratch someone else, just to give themselves a rest, a moment of relief. All right, I think I'm done today. And thank you so much for being on Expedition Self. And I'm sending lots and lots of love and peace to the people in Ukraine and all the people in the world that are affected in some way by aggression and violence and meanness.